In the year 1300, justice was no impartial maiden, blindfolded and serene, holding scales of unerring truth. No, justice was a wild, untamed beast, its sinews pulsing with the raw clamour of village whispers and the fevered roar of a mob. It did not wait patiently for evidence or reason. It lunged, swift and merciless, at the mere utterance of a name, branded with accusation. To break a rule in this world was to step into a storm where truth held no dominion, only the weight of a crowd's fervour, the venom of a pointed finger, the dread of a name jeered through muddy streets. An accusation was not merely a charge, it was a sentence in itself, a prelude to suffering, a spark igniting the pyre of fate. Jails, dank and reeking, were not yet places of punishment, but purgatories of waiting, where the air was thick with despair and the walls echoed with the groans of the accused. Fingers were severed, tongues silenced, and bodies left to sway in the wind, grim totems warning all who dared to stray from the narrow path of obedience. In this age, the scales of justice tipped not toward fairness, but toward chance, swayed by the fickle winds of power, rumour, and reputation. To understand this world is to embark on a journey into the heart of medieval justice, where the courtroom was no sterile hall of deliberation, but a chaotic theatre of human passion. Here, the law was a living tapestry, threadbare and frayed, woven from the stories told in ale-soaked taverns and whispered around crackling hearths. Truth, if it existed at all, bent beneath the weight of influence, and justice was less a pursuit of right than a spectacle of control. The village square was both stage and scaffold, where the drama of accusation unfolded before a crowd, hungry for resolution, their voices a chorus that could condemn or absolve with equal caprice. In this realm, the law was not a distant arbiter, but a visceral force, its judgments etched in blood and fear. The medieval world was one of tight-knit communities, where anonymity was a luxury few could claim, and every soul was bound by the invisible threads of reputation. A single whisper, born of envy or spite, could unravel a life as easily as a loose thread tears a garment. In the marketplace or by the communal well, words carried a weight far beyond their sound, spiraling into storms of suspicion that could engulf the innocent and guilty alike. To be accused was to be snared in a web of perception, where innocence was a fragile shield against the tide of communal judgment. The law, such as it was, thrived not on facts, but on the charisma of the accuser, the sway of their social standing, and the fervour of the crowd that amplified their claims. Justice was a performance, and the stage was set not for truth, but for the orchestration of order amid chaos. Judges, often local nobles or officials cloaked in the trappings of authority, waded through these murky waters, their decisions shaped less by evidence than by the currents of power and hearsay. A lord's nod or a priest's condemnation could transform idle gossip into a death sentence, while a well-placed coin might soften the blow for those with means. The accuser's identity, be it marked by wealth, piety, or connections, tipped the scales far more than the crime itself. In this world, justice was a labyrinth of vendettas and alliances, where personal grudges masqueraded as righteous verdicts. The crowd, volatile and superstitious, added its own unpredictable weight, their cheers or jeers shaping the outcome as surely as any decree. The court of public opinion often ruled before the judge's gavel fell, its verdict echoing through the streets like a relentless drumbeat. Trials were not merely judicial proceedings, but communal rituals, performances that etched the boundaries of acceptable behavior into the collective memory. The accused stood trembling before a crowd that was both audience and jury, their fate hinging on the drama unfolding around them. The judge, elevated on a dais of power, played the role of playwright, crafting a narrative that reinforced the social order. Lacking widespread literacy, these spectacles took on the cadence of poetry, their lessons clear to every villager: stray and you will pay. Punishments were swift and brutal, designed not for rehabilitation but for deterrence, their outcomes as public as the accusations that birthed them. Executioners, grim artisans of death, were the final actors in this theatre, their axes and nooses embodying the community's unforgiving will. To be accused was to step into a dance with fate, where a single misstep could lead to oblivion. The jails of this era were not places of reform but stone-clad limbo, where the accused languished in cold, fetid cells awaiting judgment. These were not prisons in the modern sense, but holding pens, their walls slick with damp and despair, their air heavy with the stench of unwashed bodies and fear. The clank of chains and the skitter of rats were the only companions for those trapped within, their days bleeding into nights of restless dread. Food, when it came, was sparse and often spoiled, a cruel reminder of the world beyond the bars. Hope was a fragile thing, clinging to the edges of consciousness, while the spectre of punishment loomed like a shadow over every moment. These jails were not designed to correct but to contain, their very existence a testament to the raw power of those who held the keys. In this world, accusation was a weapon, wielded with precision by those with influence and with reckless abandon by those with grudges. A neighbour's spiteful word, a rival's calculated slander, could set in motion a chain of events that ended in ruin. Priests, standing as moral arbiters, could amplify a whisper into a divine condemnation, their sermons casting the accused into a purgatory of social exile. Lords, ever mindful of their authority, used accusations to settle scores or tighten their grip on power, their words carrying the weight of law itself. The accused, whether peasant or noble, stood on a precipice, their fate determined not by what they had done but by who they were and who stood against them. In this precarious balance, justice was less a pursuit of truth than a means of maintaining order, its scales forever tipped by the hands of the powerful. The legacy of medieval justice is a tapestry of contradictions, woven with threads of brutality and pragmatism. It was a system that, for all its flaws, held together a society teetering on the edge of chaos. Its echoes resonate in the foundations of modern legal systems, reminding us of the long and arduous journey from justice swayed by spectacle to systems striving for impartiality. To look upon this world is to see not only its stark cruelties, but also the human struggle to define fairness in an unforgiving age. The whispers of the village square, the roar of the mob, the cold stone of the jail, all are threads in a story that speaks to the eternal quest for balance between authority, justice, and the rights of the individual. In the villages and towns of this era, where life unfolded in the tight embrace of community, accusations were not mere words, but harbingers of doom. A casual remark, born of jealousy or malice, could ignite a firestorm of suspicion, spreading faster than plague through the close-knit streets. The accused found themselves ensnared in a web of communal scrutiny, where innocence was a flimsy defense against the weight of perception. Every glance, every whispered tale became a thread in the tapestry of their fate, weaving a narrative that could condemn them before a single witness was called. The law, such as it was, thrived on this social drama, its verdicts shaped by the stories told over mugs of ale or in the shadow of the church. Authority figures, lords, priests, and magistrates were the weavers of this tapestry, their influence amplifying the power of accusation. A priest's sermon could transform gossip into divine judgment, casting the accused as a sinner in the eyes of both God and man. A lord's accusation, backed by wealth or title, could elevate a rumor to a certainty, its weight crushing any hope of defense. The law was less a system of rules than a performance of power, its outcomes determined by the charisma and connections of those who wielded it. In this world, justice was a mirror reflecting the hierarchies of society, its surface clouded by the breath of those who held sway. The crowd, ever present and ever volatile, was both spectator and actor in this drama. Their murmurs and shouts could sway a judge as surely as any evidence, their superstitions and prejudices shaping the course of a trial. The village square became a stage where justice was performed, its lessons etched into the minds of all who watched. To be accused was to stand naked before this audience, stripped of dignity and at the mercy of their collective will. The law, in its raw and unrefined form, was a reflection of the community itself, flawed, passionate, and unrelenting in its pursuit of order. This was a world where justice was not a right, but a privilege, its outcomes as unpredictable as the roll of dice. The accused, whether guilty or innocent, were players in a game where the rules were written by those with power. To navigate this world was to walk a knife's edge, where a single word could mean salvation or damnation. The legacy of this era is not merely its brutality, but its reminder of the fragility of fairness, a cautionary tale of what happens when justice is left to the whims of men and mobs. In the shadowed tapestry of medieval life, where every soul was tethered to the pulse of the village, reputation was a currency more precious than gold, yet as fragile as a spider's silk, glinting in the dawn. A single whispered word, laced with envy or sharpened by spite, could unravel a life with the ferocity of a storm tearing through a thatched roof. In the year 1300, to be known was to be vulnerable, for the tight-knit communities of hamlet and town were arenas where perception held more sway than truth. A name, once tarnished by accusation, became a wound that bled through generations, its stain seeping into the very stones of the village square. Here, justice was not a dispassionate arbiter, but a wild dance of rumour and power, where the weight of a glance or the venom of a whispered tale could tip the scales toward ruin. In these close-woven societies, where anonymity was as rare as a winter rose, every word spoken over a shared well or in the flicker of a tavern's hearth carried the power to build or destroy. A neighbour's careless remark, born of a grudge over a trampled fence or a stolen glance, could ignite a tempest of suspicion, spreading with the speed of wildfire through the crowded lanes. The accused found themselves ensnared in a web of communal scrutiny, where innocence was a frail shield against the relentless tide of hearsay. To be caught in the snare of scandal was not a matter of what was true, but of what was believed, and belief was a beast fed by the stories that swirled through the village like leaves in a gale. In the dim glow of candlelit homes or the raucous din of ale-soaked gatherings, tales took on a life of their own, twisting and tangling until they wove a narrative that could condemn before a judge ever raised his gavel. The law, such as it was, thrived on this chaotic tapestry of perception. It was less a system of rules than a performance of social order, its verdicts shaped by the voices that echoed loudest in the community's collective ear. Judges, often local nobles or officials cloaked in the trappings of authority, navigated these murky waters with decisions that bore the weight of stories rather than facts. A lord's whispered grudge, a priest's sermon steeped in moral fire, could transform idle gossip into a sentence as binding as iron. The accuser's standing, whether marked by wealth, piety, or the strength of their kin, held more power than the deed itself, turning justice into a labyrinth where personal vendettas masqueraded as righteous decrees. In this world, the truth was a fleeting shadow, often crushed beneath the boots of those who wielded influence. The crowd, ever present and volatile, was both spectator and puppeteer in this drama. Their murmurs, their jeers, their fervent prayers were threads that wove the fate of the accused. In the market square or the churchyard, where villagers gathered to witness the unfolding of justice, their emotions were a force as potent as any law. Superstition and prejudice danced in their eyes, their voices rising like a tide to sway the proceedings. A single shout of outrage or a chorus of whispered doubts could tip the scales, rendering the accused guilty in the court of public opinion long before an official verdict was spoken. This was no mere gathering of onlookers, but a living, breathing entity, its passions shaping the narrative as surely as a playwright's quill. The community was both judge and jury, its collective will a hammer that forged the chains of fate. In this precarious system, accusations were not mere words but weapons, sharpened by the identity and influence of those who wielded them. A wealthy merchant's charge carried the weight of coin, bending the law to his favor with the ease of a river carving through soft earth. A pious cleric's accusation, draped in the sanctity of the church, could cast a shadow of divine condemnation, leaving the accused trembling beneath the weight of eternal judgment. Even a commoner, backed by the fervor of a vengeful crowd, could wield a power disproportionate to their station, their words amplified by the communal hunger for resolution. The scales of justice, far from balanced, tilted toward those with the means to pull the strings, whether through gold, godliness, or the sheer force of social connections. To be accused was to stand on a precipice, where the fall was determined not by the crime, but by the social ladder on which the accuser and accused stood. This reality transformed the medieval courtroom into a theatre of strategy and spectacle, where truth struggled to breathe beneath the weight of alliances and power plays. The accused, whether peasant or noble, were players in a game where the rules were written by those above them. A lord might accuse to settle a score, his words carrying the authority of his title, while a rival's slander could be a calculated move to climb the rungs of influence. The crowd, with its roiling emotions and unyielding gaze, added a volatile spark to this tinderbox, their reactions as unpredictable as a storm at sea. To navigate this world was to dance on a knife's edge, where a single misstep, a poorly chosen word, a glance misread, could cement a fate as unyielding as the stone walls of a dungeon. Justice, in this sense, was less a pursuit of fairness than a ritual of control, its outcomes a reflection of the hierarchies that bound the community together. The fragility of reputation made every villager, from the humblest farmer to the loftiest knight, a potential victim of this system. For the commoner, a false accusation could mean destitution, their meager resources drained by fines or their body broken by punishment. For the noble, the threat was social disgrace, a stain that could tarnish their lineage for generations. Yet even the elite were not immune to the crowd's judgment, their titles offering only a thin shield against the tide of scandal. This dark equality, where accusation could dismantle both high and low, wove a thread of fear through every heart, reminding all that the community's gaze was relentless. In the tavern's glow or the church's shadow, stories of guilt and innocence were spun, their truth less important than their power to shape the social order. The communal nature of this justice made every accusation a shared event, a drama that unfolded not in isolation, but in the heart of the village. Market squares, church grounds, and tavern corners became arenas where gossip served as testimony, and truth was as fluid as the ale that fueled the tales. The accused lived under a microscope of scrutiny, their every move dissected by neighbors turned jurors. A misspoken word, a gesture misread, could become the final nail in their coffin, their identity reshaped by the stories told in their absence. In a world where literacy was scarce and legal knowledge scarcer, these informal trials held as much weight as any formal court, their verdicts etched into the community's memory long before a judge's decree was spoken. This system, for all its chaos, was a mirror of the society it served. It was a world where order was maintained not through fairness but through fear, where the threat of accusation kept the community in line. The law was a tapestry woven from the threads of human passion, envy, loyalty, vengeance, and faith, each strand pulling the fabric tighter around those who dared to stray. To be accused was to become a character in a story larger than oneself, a cautionary tale told to children by firelight or whispered in warning to those who teetered on the edge of transgression. The legacy of these accusations lingered like ghosts, their lessons haunting the community long after the accused faded into memory. In this medieval world, justice was not a beacon of truth, but a flame that flickered with the whims of the powerful and the passions of the crowd. It was a system that thrived on spectacle, its verdicts as much a product of theatre as of law. Yet within its contradictions lay a stark truth. The pursuit of justice, however flawed, was a reflection of humanity's endless struggle to impose order on a chaotic world. The whispers that began in the village square, the accusations that tore through lives, were not merely acts of cruelty but threads in a larger tapestry, one that told the story of a society bound by fear, faith, and the fragile hope of fairness. In the year 1300, the medieval courtroom was no hallowed hall of reasoned debate, but a raucous stage where justice unfurled as a grand, chaotic spectacle, its pulse quickened by the clamor of the crowd and the weight of raw power. Here, in the heart of villages and towns, the law was less a quest for truth than a communal drama, a theatre where the scales of fate teetered not on evidence, but on the fervor of accusation, the sway of influence, and the mercurial tide of public sentiment. The air crackled with anticipation as villagers gathered, their murmurs weaving a tapestry of suspense that draped the proceedings in an almost sacred tension. This was no mere adjudication, it was a ritual, a performance etched into the collective soul of the community, where every shout, every whispered rumor, and every stern decree played a part in the unfolding narrative of order and retribution. The medieval trial was a living, breathing beast, its stage set not in sterile chambers but in the open squares or shadowed naves where the community converged. Picture a village marketplace, its cobblestones worn by centuries of tread, now thronged with peasants, tradesmen, and curious onlookers, their faces alight with the thrill of judgment. The judge, often a noble draped in robes that spoke of authority rather than impartiality, presided from an elevated seat, his presence a stark reminder of the hierarchy that governed every soul present. The accused stood trembling, a solitary figure dwarfed by the crowd's gaze, their fate tethered to the whims of those who watched and whispered. The court was a cauldron of human passion, where the boundaries between justice and theatre blurred, and the outcome was as much a product of performance as of law. This was a world where trials were not confined to legal arguments, but burst forth as communal spectacles, their rhythms dictated by the pulse of the crowd. The shuffle of feet on straw-strewn floors, the sharp cry of a court crier announcing the day's cases, and the low hum of gossip formed a symphony that set the stage. The proceedings were less about uncovering truth than about orchestrating a drama that reinforced the social order. Every trial was a mirror reflecting the community's values, its fears, and its unrelenting need to draw lines between right and wrong. The judge, as both arbiter and playwright, crafted a narrative that spoke to the crowd's hunger for resolution, his words shaping not just the fate of the accused, but the very fabric of the village's moral code. The crowd was no passive audience, but an active force, their emotions a tide that could lift or drown the accused. Their cheers, jeers, and fervent prayers were as much a part of the trial as the testimony itself, their superstitions and prejudices weaving threads of influence through the proceedings. A single shout of outrage could sway a judge's heart. A ripple of sympathy might soften a verdict. The court of public opinion held its own gavel, its verdict often pronounced before the official one was spoken. In the tight-knit world of the medieval village where every soul was known and every deed scrutinized, the crowd's voice was a hammer forging the chains of justice, its weight as unyielding as the stone walls that framed the scene. Accusations in this precarious system were not mere charges but sparks that ignited the communal imagination. They were shaped by the identity of the accuser, whose wealth, piety, or social standing could tip the scales far more than the crime itself. A lord's accusation, backed by the weight of his title, carried the force of a royal decree, while a merchant's coin could buy leniency where words alone failed. Even a commoner, armed with the crowd's fervor, could wield a power disproportionate to their station, their words amplified by the collective hunger for a scapegoat. The accused, whether guilty or innocent, were pawns in a game where the rules were written by those with influence, their fate less a matter of evidence than of the social ladder on which they stood. The medieval courtroom was a labyrinth of motives and maneuvers where personal vendettas and strategic alliances held as much sway as any law. Truth, if it surfaced at all, was a fragile thing, often drowned beneath the weight of power plays and communal expectations. The judge navigated this maze with an eye not to fairness but to the preservation of order, his decisions shaped by the need to appease the crowd and uphold the authority of those above him. A well-placed bribe, a whispered threat, or a display of piety could shift the course of a trial, turning justice into a dance of influence where the powerful led and the powerless followed. The performative nature of these trials made them as much theatre as tribunal. Lacking widespread literacy, the community relied on the spectacle to communicate its values, its lessons, etched in the public humiliation of the accused or the grim finality of punishment. The judge, stern and unyielding, played the role of the moral arbiter, his pronouncements carrying the weight of divine will. The accused, trembling or defiant, were the tragic protagonists, their every word and gesture scrutinized by a crowd eager for drama. The onlookers, with their shouts and silences, were both chorus and critic, their reactions shaping the narrative as it unfolded. Each trial was a story told in flesh and blood, its conclusion a communal catharsis that reaffirmed the boundaries of acceptable behavior. Punishments, when they came, were as public as the accusations that birthed them, designed not for rehabilitation, but for deterrence. The stocks, the pillory, the noose, all were props in this grim theatre, their presence a reminder of the consequences of straying from the path. The executioner, a shadowed figure both feared and necessary, was the final actor, his blade or rope, the punctuation mark on the community's verdict. These punishments were not merely acts of justice, but rituals that bound the village together, their brutality a stark lesson in the cost of defiance. To witness a trial was to participate in a communal act of judgment, to reaffirm the hierarchy that held the world in place. The legacy of these trials was not in their fairness, but in their power to shape the collective memory. They were stories told and retold, their lessons woven into the fabric of village life. A trial was not just a moment, but a marker, a cautionary tale that lingered in the whispers of children and the warnings of elders. The accused, whether freed or condemned, became characters in a larger narrative, their fates a mirror of the community's values and fears. The courtroom, with its cacophony of voices and its stark displays of power, was a stage where the human struggle for order played out, its echoes resonating through the ages. In this world, justice was a communal endeavor, its outcomes as much a product of the crowd's passions as of the judge's decree. The medieval trial was a dance of power and perception, where the truth was often a casualty of the need for order. To stand accused was to step into a spotlight that burned with the intensity of 1,000 eyes, each one judging, each one waiting for the curtain to fall. The legacy of this system is a reminder of the fragility of fairness, a testament to the human desire to impose meaning on a chaotic world. In the medieval courtroom, justice was not a beacon, but a flame, flickering with the whims of those who held the torch, its light both illuminating and consuming. In the brutal, unyielding tapestry of the year 1300, justice was not a gentle hand seeking truth, but an iron fist, cloaked in the trappings of order, meting out punishments that seared both flesh and soul. In the medieval world, the scales of retribution were not balanced by fairness, but tipped by wealth, status, and the relentless need to maintain the fragile hierarchy that bound society together. Punishments were not merely penalties, but public spectacles, woven into the fabric of village life, designed to deter through fear and shame while reinforcing the stark divides between the powerful and the powerless. From the clink of coins in fines to the crack of the whip in the town square, justice was a currency, its price exacted in blood, dignity, or gold, depending on one's place in the world. To be punished was to become a living lesson, a cautionary tale, etched into the collective memory of the community, where the sting of the lash or the weight of a fine spoke louder than any sermon. The medieval system of punishment was a grim theatre, its stage set in the bustling marketplaces and shadowed churchyards where villagers gathered to witness the consequences of transgression. Fines, known as amercements, were the most common currency of justice, levied for offences as varied as theft, slander, or disturbing the peace. For the wealthy, a fine was a mere inconvenience, a toll paid to sidestep the harsher fates that awaited those without means. A merchant or noble could empty their purse and walk free, their status intact, their reputation barely bruised. But for the peasant, a fine was a crushing blow, a yoke that could drag a family into the abyss of poverty. In a world where every coin was weighed against the promise of the next meal, a single penalty could mean the loss of land, livestock, or the tools needed to survive the coming harvest. Justice, in this guise, was a predator, preying on those least able to bear its bite. The economy of fines laid bare the chasm between the haves and the have-nots. For the affluent, paying a fine was a transaction, a negotiated escape from the stocks or the scaffold. It was a privilege that underscored the medieval maxim: wealth was worth, and worth was power. A lord could settle a dispute with a handful of silver, his honor preserved, while a peasant's fine might cost them their home, their livelihood, their very place in the community. The system commodified crime, turning justice into a marketplace where the poor paid with everything they had, and the rich with barely a thought. This disparity was no accident, but a deliberate thread in the tapestry of medieval society, where the law served to uphold the hierarchy as much as to punish wrongdoing. Public punishment, however, was the true spectacle, a communal ritual that transformed the town square into a stage of shame and suffering. Stocks and pillories, those wooden sentinels of justice, stood as grim icons in the heart of every village, their presence a constant reminder of the cost of defiance. Here, the convicted were bound, their heads and hands locked in place, exposed to the elements and the scorn of their neighbors. The crowd, ever eager for drama, hurled jeers, rotten vegetables, and occasionally stones, their taunts a chorus that amplified the humiliation. From petty thieves to those guilty of graver offenses, all faced this public reckoning, their punishment a shared experience that bound the community together. To stand in the stocks was not just to suffer, but to become a symbol, a living warning to others of the boundaries that held society in check. The pillory was more than a physical restraint. It was a crucible of social judgment, where the convicted faced not just the bite of the wind, but the weight of communal disdain. Each jeer, each thrown object, was a thread in the fabric of justice, weaving the offender's shame into the collective narrative. The crowd was not merely a witness, but a participant, their actions reinforcing the moral code that governed their lives. This ritual of public shaming was a dance of power, where the community reaffirmed its unity by casting out those who strayed. It was a spectacle that blurred the line between justice and entertainment, turning punishment into a communal catharsis that strengthened the bonds of village life while breaking the spirit of the condemned. For the peasant, these punishments were a heavy burden, their consequences rippling far beyond the moment of retribution. A fine, even for a minor infraction, could tip a family into ruin, stripping them of the means to survive in an agrarian world where every resource was precious. The concept of weergild, reparation for injury or death, was meant to offer compensation, but for the poor it was often a crushing debt, levied without regard for their meager means. A single misstep could mean the loss of everything, from the plough that tilled the fields to the roof that sheltered a family. The law, in its unyielding pursuit of order, perpetuated a cycle of poverty that kept the lower classes tethered to their place, their lives a fragile thread in the loom of medieval justice. The nobility, by contrast, played by a different set of rules, their wealth and status a shield against the harsher edges of punishment. In the manorial courts, where lords dispensed justice with an eye to their own interests, a noble's penalty was often a token gesture, a fine that amounted to little more than a nod to the law. Behind closed doors, negotiations and influence softened the blow, ensuring that the elite faced not the stocks but a quiet settlement, their honor preserved by the weight of their name. When a noble did face public punishment, it was often a carefully staged affair designed to uphold appearances rather than exact true retribution. The law bent to their will, a pliable tool in the hands of those who wielded power, leaving the commoner to bear the full weight of its wrath. This disparity was a stark reflection of the medieval hierarchy, where justice was not a right but a privilege, its benefits reserved for those who could afford them. The noble could navigate the legal landscape with ease, their influence a currency that bought leniency where others found only suffering. A well-placed bribe, a strategic marriage, or a nod from a powerful ally could turn a sentence into a mere inconvenience, while the peasant faced a system rigged to keep them in their place. The law was a mirror of the society it served, its punishments a map of the divides that separated the powerful from the powerless, the privileged from the destitute. Yet amidst this grim theatre there were flickers of compassion, brief moments when the community's heart softened, A village might rally to protest a punishment deemed too harsh, their voices rising in a rare chorus of mercy. A noble, moved by grace or pragmatism, might spare a subordinate, their act of clemency a reminder that even in a world ruled by power, humanity could find a foothold. These moments were rare, fleeting glimpses of a justice that aspired to fairness, yet they shone like stars against the dark backdrop of medieval retribution. They were reminders that even in a system built on fear and control, the human spirit could seek balance, could strive for something more than the relentless grind of punishment. The spectacle of medieval justice was a paradox, a system that maintained order through inequality, its punishments as much about reinforcing hierarchy as about addressing crime. The stocks, the fines, the public lashings, they were not just penalties, but performances, each one a lesson in the cost of defiance. The community, gathered in the square, was both audience and actor, their participation a ritual that bound them to the law and to each other. Yet this same system deepened the divides it sought to bridge, its inequities a stark reminder that justice was often a tool of the powerful, wielded to keep the world in its appointed order. In the end, medieval punishment was a tapestry woven with threads of cruelty and pragmatism, its patterns a reflection of a society that valued stability above fairness. The fines that bankrupted the poor, the stocks that shamed the defiant, the leniency granted to the privileged, all were part of a larger story, one that spoke to the human struggle to impose order on a chaotic world. The legacy of this era is not just its brutality but its complexity, a reminder that justice, even at its most flawed, is a mirror of the society that shapes it. In the echoes of the medieval square, we hear the faint call to strive for a justice that balances punishment with compassion, power with equity, and fear with hope. In the year 1300, the medieval world trembled beneath the weight of a justice that sought truth not in the quiet of reason, but in the fierce crucible of divine ordeal. Here, crime was not merely a breach of earthly law, but a tear in the cosmic tapestry, a sin that demanded God's own judgment to mend. The trial by ordeal, a ritual steeped in faith and fire, was no mere legal proceeding, but a sacred theatre where the divine was summoned to speak through the elements, through searing flames, scalding water, or the cold embrace of a consecrated pool. In these moments, the village square became a hallowed stage where the accused stood not before men alone, but before the Almighty, their fate hanging on the whim of wounds that festered or healed. This was a world where justice was a dance with the divine, its steps as brutal as they were revered, its verdicts etched in the flesh of those who dared to stand accused. Imagine a medieval village, its heart pulsing with anticipation, as the community gathers around a flickering pyre or a steaming cauldron. The air is thick with the scent of smoke and sanctity. The crowd's murmurs a low hymn of expectation. The accused, trembling yet resolute, stands before a magistrate who trusts not in testimony, but in the will of God to unveil the guilty from the innocent. The ordeal was a spectacle that wove together faith and fear, its rituals a bridge between the earthly and the divine. Whether accused of theft, witchcraft, or betrayal, the defendant faced trials that defied logic yet held an unshakable grip on the medieval mind. To carry a glowing iron bar, to walk barefoot across fiery coals, or to plunge an arm into boiling water, these were not punishments, but tests, their outcomes a divine script written in blisters and burns. The trial by fire was a fierce arbiter, its flames a judge that spoke in tongues of pain. Picture the scene, a courthouse not of stone and timber, but of firelight and shadow, where the accused clutches a red-hot iron rod, their flesh sizzling as the crowd holds its breath. The silence is broken only by gasps, the air shimmering with heat and dread. A priest, cloaked in the authority of the church, oversees the ritual, his presence ensuring that this is no act of vengeance, but a sacred inquisition. Days later, the wounds are inspected with a scrutiny that borders on reverence. A clean, healing wound is a whisper of innocence, a sign that God has spared the soul. But a festering sore, raw and weeping, is a mark of guilt, a divine condemnation that seals the accused's fate. In this dance of fire and flesh, human law and divine will were fused, their union a testament to a world that saw justice as a celestial mandate. Water, too, held its sacred place in the theatre of ordeal. The trial by cold water, rooted in the symbolism of purity and rebirth, was a ritual as enigmatic as it was brutal. The accused, bound hand and foot, was cast into a pool consecrated by holy rites, the community watching from the shore with whispered prayers and bated breath. If they floated, the water rejected them, proclaiming their guilt to the heavens. If they sank, their purity was affirmed, though the cost of such vindication was often a watery grave. To modern eyes, this seems a cruel jest, chance masquerading as divine will. But to the medieval faithful, it was a solemn chapter in a sacred narrative, where the ripples on the water's surface carried the weight of God's judgment. The crowd, steeped in faith, saw not randomness but revelation, their belief unshaken by the absurdity of the test. The wounds born of these ordeals were more than marks on the body. They were pages in a divine manuscript, each scar a word in a story of guilt or redemption. Days after the trial, priests and officials gathered to inspect the injuries with a meticulousness that bordered on obsession. A clean wound, knitting smoothly, was a sign of divine favor, a reprieve that restored the accused to the community's embrace. But a wound that festered, swollen with infection, was a verdict of spiritual corruption, a sentence that could lead to exile or death. This reliance on the body's response reflected a rudimentary understanding of healing, yet it was accepted as a sacred script where suffering and survival were read as markers of moral purity or sin. The ordeal was not just a trial, but a communion, a moment where the divine spoke through the frail vessel of human flesh. Religion was not merely the backdrop of these ordeals, but their very foundation, the script that gave them meaning. The church, with its towering influence, cast a long shadow over the proceedings, its rituals lending an air of divine legitimacy to the spectacle. Priests, as intermediaries between man and God, conducted the sacred rites that framed the ordeal, their prayers and blessings weaving a cloak of sanctity around the brutal act. To question the ordeal was to doubt the will of God, a heresy unthinkable in a world where faith was as vital as breath. The Church's presence ensured that justice was not merely a human affair, but a divine mandate, its verdicts carrying the weight of eternal consequence. In this intricate dance of law and spirit, the line between earthly justice and heavenly judgment was as thin as a whispered prayer. The community, gathered in the square, was both witness and participant in this sacred drama. Their eyes, fixed on the accused, were not merely curious but reverent, believing that God's hand would guide the outcome. Their murmurs, their gasps, their fervent chants were part of the ritual, a collective invocation of divine will. The ordeal was a communal act, a moment where the village came together to affirm its faith in a higher power. Yet this faith was not without its shadows. The spectacle of ordeal, with its reliance on chance and suffering, was a flawed pursuit of truth, its logic as fragile as the flesh it tested. The crowd, though united in belief, was also a volatile force, their emotions swaying the proceedings as surely as the priest's prayers. As the centuries turned, the cracks in this system began to show. The Fourth Lateran Council of 1215 marked a turning point, with Pope Innocent III forbidding clergy from participating in ordeals, signaling a shift toward more rational approaches. The Church's withdrawal from these rituals opened the door to written laws and evidence-based inquiries, as the medieval world began to inch toward a justice grounded in reason rather than divine intervention. Yet the legacy of the ordeal lingered, its echoes woven into the folklore and cultural memory of the villages it had once defined. The fires that had burned, the waters that had judged, became stories told by firelight, cautionary tales of a time when justice was a gamble with the divine. This transition was not a clean break, but a slow unraveling, as the medieval mind grappled with the tension between faith and reason. The ordeal, for all its brutality, had been a cornerstone of a world where the divine was ever present, its will manifest in every aspect of life. To abandon it was to step into uncharted territory, where truth was sought not in the elements but in the testimony of men. Yet even as the flames of ordeal flickered out and the waters stilled, faith remained a quiet ember, glowing in the hearts of those who sought certainty in a world of mystery. The trial by ordeal was a relic of a time when justice was a sacred act, its lessons a reminder of humanity's endless quest to balance the earthly and the divine. In the medieval tapestry, the ordeal was a thread of both beauty and terror, a ritual that bound the community to its faith, even as it tore at the flesh of the accused. It was a system that thrived on the belief that God would not let the innocent suffer, yet its reliance on chance revealed the fragility of that belief. The scars it left on bodies, on souls, on the collective memory, were a testament to a world that saw justice as a divine performance, its outcomes as unpredictable as the will of the heavens. As we look back on this era, we see not just its brutality, but its humanity, its struggle to find truth in a world where the divine and the mortal were inextricably entwined. In the grim theatre of the year 1300, where the medieval world spun its tales of order and retribution, public executions stood as the darkest act, a macabre spectacle where justice played out its most visceral scenes. These were not mere punishments, but communal rituals, visceral lessons carved into the heart of society, where the scaffold was both stage and altar, and the crowd was both witness and participant. The town square, alive with the clamour of gathered villagers, thrummed with a strange alchemy of dread and fascination as the condemned faced their final moments under the unyielding gaze of the community. The creak of the gallows, the thud of the axe, the collective gasp of onlookers. These were the sounds that punctuated the medieval air, each one a note in a grim symphony that reaffirmed the power of the law and the fragility of life. Executions were not just endings but performances, their lessons etched in blood and memory, binding the village in a shared dance of morality and control. Picture a village on execution day, its cobblestone square packed with peasants, tradesmen, and curious travellers, their faces a mosaic of fear, awe, and grim satisfaction. The scaffold looms at the centre, a wooden relic worn by time and tragedy, its presence a silent promise of the fate awaiting those who defy the law. The air is thick with the scent of sweat and anticipation, the crowd's murmurs rising like a tide as the condemned is led forth, bound in ropes or chains, their eyes darting between defiance and despair. The executioner, a shadowed figure cloaked in black, stands ready, his tools gleaming with a craftsman's care, his role both reviled and revered. This is no quiet courtroom, but a living stage, where the drama of justice unfolds in full view, its narrative shaped by the crowd's roars and the law's unyielding hand. Executions were more than punishments. They were spectacles meticulously orchestrated to affirm the authority of lords, crowns, and the church itself. In an age where literacy was a rare gift, these public displays were the law's loudest voice, their messages clear to every soul present: defy the order and pay with your life. The scaffold was a canvas where power painted its warnings in stark, bloody strokes, each death a reminder of the hierarchy that held the world in place. The local lord or his stern officials presided over the scene, their presence a tangible extension of the crown's might, while the executioner, with his axe or noose, was the grim artisan who brought the verdict to life. Even the church lent its solemn weight, priests intoning prayers that wove divine sanction into the act, blurring the line between earthly justice and heavenly mandate. The methods of execution were aldo, chosen with care to match the crime's severity, were as varied as the sins they punished. Hanging, the most common fate for thieves and highwaymen, was a swift and public affair, the noose a stark symbol of the law's reach. The condemned were paraded through jeering crowds, their final walk a ritual of shame that culminated in the gallows embrace. For graver offences, treason, heresy, the punishments grew darker. Beheading, often reserved for nobles, promised a cleaner death, though a clumsy executioner could turn it grotesque with a botched stroke. The most heinous crimes, like high treason, called for drawing and quartering, a protracted horror where the body was torn apart, its pieces displayed as grisly trophies at city gates or on spikes. These brutal ends were not mere punishments, but public lessons, their remains a haunting warning to all who passed. The executioner was a figure both feared and indispensable, a craftsman of death whose skill was honed through generations. Often inheriting the trade from their fathers, executioners were masters of their grim art, their tools, axe, rope, or blade, maintained with a precision that belied their dark purpose. Yet society shunned them, their constant dance with death marking them as outcasts. Hidden behind masks or cloaks, they moved through the crowd like spectres, their anonymity a shield against the stigma of their craft. Some, it is said, formed fleeting bonds with the condemned, offering a whispered word or a quicker end for a coin. Others became legends in their own right, their names whispered with a mix of dread and respect, their proficiency lending a morbid celebrity to their shadowed existence. The crowd, gathered in the square, was no passive audience but a vital force, their reactions shaping the atmosphere as surely as the executioner's hand. Execution days were communal events drawing people from near and far, their anticipation mingling with the cries of merchants hawking wares amid the chaos. The spectacle was a festival of sorts, a grim celebration of justice that broke the monotony of agrarian life. Broadsides, crude pamphlets filled with tales of crime and punishment, circulated among the crowd, their dark humor and exaggerated accounts etching the event into local lore. For the villagers, these moments were a chance to explore the edges of morality, to reaffirm their shared values while standing safely distant from the scaffold's shadow. The collective catharsis bound them together, their voices a chorus that echoed the law's unyielding will. Yet this system, for all its grandeur, was riddled with flaws. Accusation often trumped evidence, and the reliance on divine will or public fervor led to tragic errors. Wrongful executions were not uncommon, their stories haunting the annals of history as ghostly reminders of justice's fallibility. The crowd's thirst for retribution could overshadow the truth, turning innocent souls into martyrs whose cries lingered in folklore. A misjudged ordeal, a coerced confession, or a mob's fervor could seal a fate undeserved, leaving behind tales of spectral visitations, ghosts of the wrongfully executed, haunting the village's dreams. These miscarriages of justice were the dark underbelly of the system, their echoes a warning of the dangers of unchecked power. The aftermath of an execution was a lingering presence, its impact rippling through the community long after the scaffold was cleared. Bodies left to the elements, heads on spikes, limbs at gates, served as grim totems, their decay a constant reminder of the law's reach. These relics shaped the identity of towns and villages, their stories woven into the fabric of local legend. Tales of ghostly figures or cursed grounds sprang from the sites of executions, suggesting that even in death the condemned sought to right the wrongs of justice. These stories, passed down through generations, became part of the cultural memory, a haunting reflection of a society grappling with the balance of punishment and mercy. The legacy of medieval executions is a complex tapestry, woven with threads of fear, faith, and power. They were spectacles that reinforced the social order, yet their brutality exposed the fragility of justice in an age ruled by passion and superstition. The scaffold was a stage where the community confronted its own morality, its collective will, both a strength and a flaw. The executioner, the crowd, the condemned, all were actors in a drama that spoke to the human struggle to define right and wrong. As we look back, we see not just the horror, but the humanity, the relentless quest for order in a chaotic world, and the faint hope that justice might one day rise above the shadows of the gallows. In the shadowed heart of the year 1300, the dense, whispering greenwoods of the medieval world were more than mere forests. They were realms of refuge and peril, where the iron grip of justice loosened its hold, and the outcast found a fleeting taste of freedom. These ancient groves, like the storied Sherwood, were not just settings for romantic tales, but living, breathing fortresses of thorn and shadow, where the law's reach tangled in the underbrush and faltered in the face of nature's untamed will. To flee into the forest was to step beyond the ordered chaos of village life, to trade the suffocating scrutiny of the community for a wilder, grittier existence. Yet this freedom was no gentle embrace. It was a pact with the wilderness, a life of raw survival where every rustle of leaves could herald salvation or doom. The greenwood was both sanctuary and purgatory, a place where the hunted forged their own code, defying the law while dancing on the edge of oblivion. Imagine a fugitive, heart-pounding, slipping beneath the canopy of ancient oaks, their footsteps muffled by a carpet of leaves that hid both path and pitfall. The forest was a labyrinth of possibility, its shadows offering concealment from the relentless eyes of sheriffs and their hounds. Yet this refuge came at a cost, for the greenwood was no idyllic haven, but a harsh crucible where survival demanded cunning, resilience, and a willingness to embrace the primal. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decay, the silence broken by the snap of twigs or the distant howl of a wolf. Food was never guaranteed, a prize won through the hunt or scavenged from the forest's meager bounty. Shelter was a makeshift affair, cobbled together from branches and mud, offering scant protection against the bite of winter winds or the drenching rains of autumn. To choose the forest was to choose a life where every dawn was a gamble, every step a test of endurance. The outlaws who sought sanctuary in these wilds were not merely fugitives, but exiles from the rigid hierarchies of medieval society. Driven by desperation or defiance, they were thieves, debtors, or those falsely accused, their names blackened by the whispers of the village square. The forest offered a semblance of freedom, a chance to slip the noose of justice, but it was a freedom laced with peril. Wild beasts prowled the undergrowth, their eyes glinting in the dark, while hunger gnawed at the body as fiercely as fear gnawed at the mind. The forest floor, deceptively soft, hid roots that tripped and streams that drowned. Every moment was a negotiation with nature, a dance between survival and surrender, where the weak perished and the cunning thrived. Yet within this unforgiving wilderness, a new kind of community took root, born of necessity and shared struggle. Outlaws, cast out by the law, forged bonds as strong as iron, creating ragtag bands that lived by their own rules. These were the seeds of legends like Robin Hood, tales woven from kernels of truth about men and women who defied the system that branded them. In the greenwood, they became their own lawmakers, their codes of honor a defiance of the society that had rejected them. A stolen loaf, a poached deer, a shared fire, these were acts of rebellion, small victories against the world that sought to crush them. The forest was their kingdom, its boughs a canopy of resistance, where loyalty was forged in the crucible of survival and betrayal was a wound deeper than any blade. These outlaw bands were not romantic brotherhoods but fragile alliances, balanced on a knife's edge of trust and necessity. The forest was a place of constant vigilance, where a misplaced word or a careless glance could unravel the delicate bonds that held the group together. Skirmishes between outlaws were as common as clashes with the law, their rivalries fueled by the scarcity of resources and the weight of desperation. Trust was a rare commodity, hoarded like food in the lean months, and betrayal could spark chaos as swiftly as a spark ignites dry tinder. The myths of heroic rogues, so beloved in later tales, glossed over these brutal truths, painting a picture of camaraderie that ignored the grim reality of lives lived on the run. In the forest, survival often meant abandoning a comrade to save oneself, a choice that left scars as deep as any wound. The church, ever a towering presence in medieval life, cast a long shadow even over the greenwood's outcasts. Excommunication was a weapon sharper than any sword, severing the fugitive not just from the community but from the grace of God. To be declared an outcast by the church was to carry a wound that bled into the soul, a mark of damnation that lingered in the whispers of the forest. Tales of spectral monks or ghostly bishops haunted the dreams of those who fled, their fears fed by stories of divine retribution that followed the excommunicate into the wild. For the peasant, or minor noble on the run, this spiritual exile was a spectre as fearsome as the sheriff's hounds, a reminder that the church's reach extended even into the heart of the forest. Some, driven by this terror, returned to face justice, seeking redemption in submission, their flight a testament to the church's power to control through fear. Survival in the greenwood demanded more than strength. It required wit, resourcefulness, and an intimate knowledge of the wild. The forest was both ally and adversary, its bounty a gift to the cunning and a trap for the unwary. Edible plants and small game were the lifeblood of the fugitive, but discerning sustenance from poison was a skill learned through trial and error, often at a deadly cost. Shelters, hastily woven from branches and leaves, offered little comfort against the elements, their fragility a constant reminder of the forest's indifference. Summer's shade gave way to winter's bite, and autumn's rains turned the ground to mud, testing even the most resilient. The outlaw's life was a relentless cycle of adaptation, where every day was a lesson in endurance, every night a battle against despair. The forest was a world apart, its rhythms dictated by the wind and the seasons rather than the decrees of lords or priests. Yet it was not beyond the law's reach, for the authorities never rested in their pursuit of those who fled. Sheriffs, driven by duty or personal vendettas, sent men and hounds into the wild, their tracks as relentless as the justice they served. The snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, could herald discovery, and the outlaw's life was one of ceaseless vigilance. Stealth became a skill as vital as any weapon, honed to a razor's edge by the constant threat of capture. To live in the forest was to dance with fate, each moment a choice between freedom and the noose, each glance backward a reminder of the thin line between survival and surrender. The myths that sprang from these forest lives were larger than the men and women who lived them, their stories woven into the tapestry of medieval folklore. Tales of heroic outlaws defying the law with cunning and courage overlooked the isolation, the hunger, the ever-present fear that defined their existence. These legends, told by firelight in village taverns, turned desperate fugitives into aspirational figures, their struggles romanticized into tales of rebellion and honor. Yet the reality was far grimmer, a life of constant risk, where the forest offered no guarantees, only possibilities. The outlaw's freedom was a fleeting thing, a shadow that vanished with the dawn, its price paid in sleepless nights and the ever-looming threat of betrayal. The legacy of these Greenwood exiles is a testament to the human spirit's defiance in the face of oppression, a reminder of the lengths to which the desperate will go to claim a sliver of freedom. The forest was a crucible where society's outcasts forged new identities, their lives a rebellion against the rigid hierarchies that sought to crush them. Yet it was also a mirror of the medieval world, where power and survival were inextricably linked, and the law's reach was never truly escaped. The stories of these outlaws, whispered through the ages, are not just tales of adventure, but of resilience, of a world where the hunted could become heroes, if only in the telling. In the greenwood's embrace, the medieval fugitive found both refuge and reckoning, a fleeting chance to rewrite their fate in a world that offered little mercy. In the shadowed year of 1300, where the medieval world wove its intricate tapestry of power and survival, the courtroom was no bastion of impartial truth, but a grand, tumultuous stage where justice unfolded as a spectacle of authority and drama. These were not sterile halls of reasoned debate, but vibrant arenas pulsing with the raw energy of communal will, where the air crackled with anticipation and the weight of whispered rumors. Villages gathered in their squares or beneath the soaring arches of cathedrals, drawn by the promise of judgment, their murmurs a living chorus that shaped the fate of the accused. Here, in the heart of medieval society, the court was a theatre where lords, clerics and commoners played their parts, each trial a performance that reinforced the fragile hierarchy binding them all. The law was not a distant arbiter, but a visceral force, its verdicts etched in the collective memory, a dance of power that could exalt or destroy with a single word. Picture a manorial court, its straw-strewn floor alive with the shuffle of feet, the air thick with the scent of damp wool, and the faint incense of nearby chapels. Peasants, farmers, and tradesmen press close, their faces a mosaic of curiosity and dread, their whispers weaving a tapestry of suspense. The judge, often a noble draped in robes heavy with authority, sits elevated above the throng, his gaze as unyielding as the stone walls around him. The accused stands alone, a solitary figure caught in the spotlight of communal scrutiny, their fate tethered to the whims of a crowd as volatile as a summer storm. The court is no quiet chamber, but a cauldron of human passion, where the boundary between sacred and secular blurs, and justice is as much a ritual as it is a verdict. Stained glass casts coloured shadows across the scene, mingling faith with governance in a seamless dance that binds the community to its lords and its God. These courts were more than places of judgment. They were stages where the drama of power unfolded, each trial a mirror reflecting the hierarchies that governed medieval life. The crowd's murmurs, the sharp calls of the court crier, the rustle of cloaks as nobles took their places, all were notes in a symphony that set the tone for justice. The judge, whether lord or appointed official, was both arbiter and playwright, crafting a narrative that upheld the authority of the crown, the church, and the social order. His robes, rich with embroidery, signified not impartiality but power, a reminder that justice was a tool of those who ruled. Peasants stood in the shadow of this authority, their place in the hierarchy as clear as the straw beneath their feet, while the sacred spaces, often near churches or cathedrals, lent a divine weight to the proceedings, intertwining the will of man with the will of God. The trinity of authority, nobles, lords, and clerics, held sway over this stage, their influence a tide that shaped the outcome. Lords dispensed justice through a lens clouded by self-interest, their decisions often driven by the need to preserve their lands, their titles, or their alliances. A trial was as much a display of their power as it was a reckoning of guilt, a chance to settle scores or reinforce their dominion. Clerics, armed with scripture and the weight of divine judgment, saw each case as a battle for the soul, their pronouncements swelling through the crowd like hymns in a sacred nave. Their presence ensured that justice was not merely a human affair, but a cosmic drama, where every verdict carried the echo of divine retribution. The accused, whether guilty or innocent, were pawns in this theatre, their fates shaped by the interplay of earthly power and heavenly mandate. The courtroom was a crucible where personal vendettas and communal grievances were laid bare, their flames fanned by the crowd's fervour. Accusations, often born of rumour or jealousy, were enough to drag a soul into the court's orbit, their truth secondary to the narrative they served. Witnesses, neighbours, rivals, or townsfolk, offered testimony that could be as tainted by bitterness as it was by fact, their words weaving a story that held more sway than evidence. The crowd, with its shouts and silences, was a force as potent as any judge, their emotions a tide that could lift or drown the accused. A compelling tale, spun with rhetorical flourish, often outweighed logical argument, turning the trial into a performance where the loudest voice or the most persuasive lie could carry the day. The law was less a pursuit of truth than a ritual of control, its outcomes shaped by the expectations of those who watched and judged. Court days were cultural touchstones, breaking the monotony of agrarian life with a spectacle that rivaled any festival. Villagers arrived clad in curiosity, their anticipation as palpable as the dust kicked up by their boots. The trial was a communal event, a chance to witness the law's hand and to reaffirm the boundaries of acceptable behaviour. The crowd was not merely an audience, but a chorus, their allegiances whispered in the spaces between testimony, their emotions a spark that could ignite the proceedings. Witnesses became unwitting stars, their tales spun into narratives that shaped the verdict before it was spoken. A well-timed sob, a defiant glare, or a fervent plea could sway the crowd, their reactions rippling through the court like a stone dropped in still water. The trial was a theatre where every gesture, every word was a performance, its impact etched into the collective memory. The verdicts were dramatic affairs, their delivery rich with theatrics as much as consequence. A judge's pronouncement delivered from his elevated seat was a moment of catharsis, the crowd's tension released in a roar of approval or dissent. The outcome was not just a legal decision but a communal act, recorded not in dusty ledgers but in the oral traditions that wove the village's history. Some accused sought mercy through repentance, their tears a public display that might soften a crowd's heart. A well-placed plea, genuine or feigned, could tip the scales toward leniency, the accused cast as a penitent soul reclaimed by the community's grace. Others met their fate with defiance, their unbowed stance transforming them into martyrs or outcasts, their stories woven into the folklore as tales of resistance or ruin. The courtroom was a tool of power, its mechanisms honed to preserve the authority of those who ruled. Lords wielded these courts with merciless precision, their judgments a proof of their role as guardians of order. Yet this power was a double-edged sword, its excesses threatening to erode the very authority it sought to uphold. A harsh verdict could spark whispers of rebellion, while a lenient one might signal weakness. The judge walked a tightrope, balancing cruelty with mercy, each decision a thread in the tapestry of control. The crowd, too, played its part, their reactions a mirror of the community's values, their voices a force that could challenge or reinforce the Lord's will. The trial was a dance of survival where every actor, judge, accused, witness, crowd knew their role in the unyielding choreography of consequence. The legacy of these courts is a paradox, a system that maintained order through spectacle, yet revealed the fragility of justice in a world ruled by power. They were stages where the human struggle for fairness played out, their outcomes as much a product of drama as of law. The accused, whether freed or condemned, became characters in a larger narrative, their fates a reflection of the society that judged them. The courtroom was a crucible where the tensions of medieval life between faith and fear, power and powerlessness were laid bare, its echoes lingering in the stories told by firelight. These trials were not just moments of judgment, but markers of a world striving to define itself, their lessons a reminder of the delicate balance between authority and humanity. In the medieval courtroom, justice was a flame, flickering with the passions of those who wielded it, its light both illuminating and consuming. The crowd's roar, the judge's decree, the accused's plea, all were threads in a tapestry that told the story of a society bound by hierarchy and haunted by the quest for order. The legacy of these trials is not just their brutality but their humanity, a testament to the endless struggle to find truth in a world of shadows. As we look back, we see not just the spectacle but the soul of a society, its courts a mirror of its fears, its faith, and its fragile hope for justice. In the shadowed crucible of the year 1300, justice in the medieval world was not a beacon of fairness but a malleable commodity, a privilege wielded by the powerful and purchased with the clink of coin or the weight of influence. It was a realm where the law bent to the will of wealth, where the courtroom was less a sanctuary of truth than a marketplace of power, its scales tipped by bribes, favors, and the unyielding hierarchies that bound society. For the poor, justice was a blunt instrument, a force that crushed without mercy, while for those with means, it was a shadow to be shaped, a tool to be wielded for personal gain. The medieval court was a stage where money and status danced a delicate waltz, their steps orchestrated by nobles, clerics, and kings, leaving the commoner to face a system rigged to keep them in their place. This was a world where justice was not blind but keenly sighted, its gaze fixed on the gleam of gold and the sway of privilege. Picture a courtroom in a bustling medieval town, not a hallowed hall of solemn deliberation, but a vibrant arena where the air hums with the murmur of deals and the rustle of parchment. The judge, draped in robes that signify authority rather than impartiality, presides over a scene as much auction as adjudication, where the highest bidder often holds the gavel. Wealthy merchants and nobles, their purses heavy with silver, command the stage, their advocates and scribes weaving webs of rhetoric to tilt the scales in their favor.
The poor, clad in threadbare tunics, stand at the margins, their voices drowned by the clamor of coin. their fates sealed by a system that values status over truth. The courtroom is a microcosm of medieval society, its proceedings a mirror of the divides that separate the privileged from the powerless, the gilded from the destitute. The currency of justice was coin, and its flow greased the wheels of the law with ruthless efficiency. Bribes were not whispered secrets, but open transactions. A lord's gold slipping into a judge's hand to soften a verdict or dismiss a charge. Wealthy defendants hired scribes to craft defenses as intricate as tapestries, their words laced with legal cunning that the poor could neither afford nor comprehend. Papal indulgences or royal charters, cloaked in the legitimacy of wax seals, were purchased to cloak misdeeds in sanctity or favor, allowing the affluent to walk free while others faced the lash or the noose. To navigate the medieval court was to play a game of influence where money was both sword and shield, cutting through accusations or deflecting their sting. For those with means, justice was a negotiation, its outcome as pliable as molten wax in the hands of the powerful. The cost of justice was a burden that fell heaviest on the poor, for whom the courtroom was a labyrinth of expense and exclusion. Court fees, travel to distant hearings, even the expectation of proper attire drained the meager resources of peasants and tradesmen, turning the pursuit of justice into a privilege they could ill afford. A single summons could plunge a family into debt, their fields left untended, or their tools sold to pay the price of a hearing. The law, in its unyielding march, offered no quarter to those without means, its mechanisms designed to preserve the hierarchy rather than challenge it. For the peasant, a trial was not a path to fairness, but a gauntlet, each step a reminder of their place at the bottom of the social ladder, their voices silenced by the weight of poverty. By contrast, the wealthy wielded time and money as weapons, their resources allowing them to delay, maneuver, and exhaust their opponents. A noble could petition kings or bishops, their grievances framed in letters that carried the weight of their title, while the poor were left to plead in person, their words lost in the din of the court. Legal wrangling was a luxury, a game of patience and strategy that only the affluent could play. They could hire advocates to spin tales of innocence, their arguments polished by coin and connection, while the commoner faced the judge alone, their truth unadorned and often unheard. The justice system, in its intricate dance, bent readily to the will of those who could pay, its outcomes a reflection of wealth rather than right. The courtroom was not just a legal arena, but a stage for social networks, where political favors and alliances wove a protective cloak around the privileged. Nobles, with their retinues of kin and vassals, turned trials into performances of diplomacy, their disputes settled not in public spectacles, but in opulent chambers hung with tapestries. Here, justice mingled with politics, its verdicts shaped by whispered deals and the bonds of blood. A noble's trial was less about guilt than about preserving their place in the hierarchy, their punishment, if it came at all, a gentle reprimand, perhaps house arrest or a brief exile, rather than the brutal fates reserved for commoners. The leges baronum, the unwritten laws of the elite, ensured that justice flowed softly for those of high birth, their trials a strategic game where the outcome was often decided before the first word was spoken.
The court was a cauldron of human passion, where the boundaries between justice and theatre blurred, and the outcome was as much a product of performance as of law. This was a world where trials were not confined to legal arguments, but burst forth as communal spectacles, their rhythms dictated by the pulse of the crowd, the shuffle of feet on straw-strewn floors, the sharp cry of a court crier announcing the day's cases, and the low hum of gossip formed a symphony that set the stage. The proceedings were less about uncovering truth than about orchestrating a drama that reinforced the social order. Every trial was a mirror reflecting the community's values, its fears, and its unrelenting need to draw lines between right and wrong. The judge, as both arbiter and playwright, crafted a narrative that spoke to the crowd's hunger for resolution, his words shaping not just the fate of the accused, but the very fabric of the village's moral code. The crowd was no passive audience, but an active force, their emotions a tide that could lift or drown the accused. Their cheers, jeers, and fervent prayers were as much a part of the trial as the testimony itself, their superstitions and prejudices weaving threads of influence through the proceedings. A single shout of outrage could sway a judge's heart. A ripple of sympathy might soften a verdict. The court of public opinion held its own gavel, its verdict often pronounced before the official one was spoken. In the tight-knit world of the medieval village where every soul was known and every deed scrutinized, the crowd's voice was a hammer forging the chains of justice, its weight as unyielding as the stone walls that framed the scene. Accusations in this precarious system were not mere charges but sparks that ignited the communal imagination. They were shaped by the identity of the accuser, whose wealth, piety, or social standing could tip the scales far more than the crime itself. A lord's accusation, backed by the weight of his title, carried the force of a royal decree, while a merchant's coin could buy leniency where words alone failed. Even a commoner, armed with the crowd's fervor, could wield a power disproportionate to their station, their words amplified by the collective hunger for a scapegoat. The accused, whether guilty or innocent, were pawns in a game where the rules were written by those with influence, their fate less a matter of evidence than of the social ladder on which they stood. The medieval courtroom was a labyrinth of motives and maneuvers where personal vendettas and strategic alliances held as much sway as any law. Truth, if it surfaced at all, was a fragile thing, often drowned beneath the weight of power plays and communal expectations. The judge navigated this maze with an eye not to fairness but to the preservation of order, his decisions shaped by the need to appease the crowd and uphold the authority of those above him. A well-placed bribe, a whispered threat, or a display of piety could shift the course of a trial, turning justice into a dance of influence where the powerful led and the powerless followed. The performative nature of these trials made them as much theatre as tribunal. Lacking widespread literacy, the community relied on the spectacle to communicate its values, its lessons, etched in the public humiliation of the accused or the grim finality of punishment. The judge, stern and unyielding, played the role of the moral arbiter, his pronouncements carrying the weight of divine will. The accused, trembling or defiant, were the tragic protagonists, their every word and gesture scrutinized by a crowd eager for drama. The onlookers, with their shouts and silences, were both chorus and critic, their reactions shaping the narrative as it unfolded. Each trial was a story told in flesh and blood, its conclusion a communal catharsis that reaffirmed the boundaries of acceptable behavior. Punishments, when they came, were as public as the accusations that birthed them, designed not for rehabilitation, but for deterrence. The stocks, the pillory, the noose, all were props in this grim theatre, their presence a reminder of the consequences of straying from the path. The executioner, a shadowed figure both feared and necessary, was the final actor, his blade or rope, the punctuation mark on the community's verdict. These punishments were not merely acts of justice, but rituals that bound the village together, their brutality a stark lesson in the cost of defiance. To witness a trial was to participate in a communal act of judgment, to reaffirm the hierarchy that held the world in place. The legacy of these trials was not in their fairness, but in their power to shape the collective memory. They were stories told and retold, their lessons woven into the fabric of village life. A trial was not just a moment, but a marker, a cautionary tale that lingered in the whispers of children and the warnings of elders.